Today my Hammer N4400 18-inch bandsaw takes center stage. There's a lot to like, but it does have its quirks, and I'm going to tell you all about them. How's it? My name is Dylan. You're watching PlyCreations, and as always, a warm welcome to my workshop. When it comes to 18-inch bandsaws, there seems to be a few industry standards that are generally suggested that buyers have a look at when they are interested in acquiring one. There seems to be very little on the example standing next to me from the stables of the Felder Group. And in my review today of the Hammer N4400, I'm going to tell you what I like. I'm going to tell you what I don't necessarily like as much. But by the end, hopefully you'll see why this, what I consider to be the dark horse in the 18-inch bandsaw class, has become my go-to for resawing wide lumber, processing raw lumber, cutting the odd bowl blank to shape, and one of my favorite uses for it, and that is cutting large bridle joints. What I like most about it and what I like least about it may surprise you, and you would need to keep watching to see what those are. So let's get on with it, and we'll start with the specs. And as we dive into the numbers, I have to add, I'm not a strict numbers guy. As long as the machine does what I asked it to do and it does so reliably, I'm happy. Now, by reliability, I don't just mean that the motor starts up when I press the green button, but when, or the kind of work that I do on the machine, that it does so consistently in a way that I can depend on. And for me, that is very important. For those of you who are interested in the exact numbers, I'm throwing a spreadsheet or a spec sheet on the screen. You can pause it, have a look at the numbers in more detail if you like. We'll probably touch on one or two of the specifications as we go along and cover one or two parts in the video in a little bit more detail. There are two specifications that I'd like to highlight before we do continue, and these fall definitely within the like department. And the one is the motor's power. It's a 2.5 kilowatt motor, which equates to just over about 3 horses, and I can honestly say that this machine has never stood back for anything I've asked it to do power wise. Secondly is the width of the bandsaw blades that it can handle, and it can handle anything from a 6mm wide blade all the way up to 25mm wide. For you guys out there in the imperial world, that equates to roughly about a quarter of an inch, or excuse me, all the way up to an inch, and it handles the minimum maximum width of blades and anything in between. Just to add, when we talk about the width of a bandsaw blade, we are including the teeth in that number. Before we continue on to the rib capacity as well as the rib fence, I'd like to apologize. Depending on how YouTube compresses the audio, you may occasionally hear a chainsaw in the background, and if anybody out there can tell me why my neighbors start up their chainsaws the moment I press record on my camera, please let me know in the comment sections. And there you will hear my inverter start up. So let me pause, bring you into the camera, and we can talk about the rib capacity. Before we get to the rib capacity and the fence in more detail, I probably need to cover an area which for most of you out there would probably be one of the most important specifications on any bandsaw, and that is the resaw capacity. And when I started looking at a new bandsaw, for me, that was probably the most important consideration. Now, the resaw capacity on the Hammer N4400 is stated as 310mm, and if I bring a standard 30cm or 300mm rule, and you'll see that it clears at the bottom there. So the stated capacity is correct. There are bandsaws out there with a larger resaw capacity, but honestly I've found that 310 is not limiting, especially considering that most of the raw lumber that I have available to me in my market is never really wider than 300mm. So the capacity on my side is not an issue, but you may consider that. Moving on to the rib capacity, that is stated as 420mm. but it is stated as 420 millimeters from the edge of the chassis to the side of the blade. And whenever you would want to use your rib fence when making a rib cut at its maximum capacity, you no longer have 420 millimeters. At the maximum capacity of, or maximum position, or the furthest position to this side of the fence before it drops down on the side of the table, the capacity is about 370 millimeters. So that may be a consideration, but honestly, when I need to do rib cuts wider than what the fence allows, I usually just do them freehand anyway. But that may be a consideration for you. Moving over to the fence, I need to drop down the guidepost to be able to show you this and move around. The aluminium or extruded aluminium fence is quite a simple system, but very effective. First of all, you've got the carrier that accommodates your fence, and that runs on a solid metal rod or a bar. It slides very easily and comfortably, so that is quite nice. If you look at the carrier, you may not see this, but I have mounting area here for the fence on this side of the carrier, meaning that I can use the fence on the other side of the blade. I've never used it that way, but I do have that available if I need it. Before I show you the configuration of the fence, I'd like to discuss the heights of the fence, and that leading on to the resaw capacity of the bandsaw. One might think that you need to have as tall a fence as possible on a machine that has a relatively large resaw capacity, and I found that to not be the case. As long as the edge of the board that sits on your table is square to the face that you register against the fence, I don't have any issues resawing a board that is substantially higher than the height of the fence. So that is one of the considerations. As I move the fence towards the blade, it stops against the assembly here, which means that if I have a flat or not as thick a board, I'm going to have difficulties doing narrower resaws. What this fence allows me to do is I can remove it and reorientate it so that this edge now becomes my fence, and I can then move that significantly closer to the blade. So it's quite an effective system, quite simple but effective. You may notice that I have no graduations on the rod here to show me what my rib cut capacities are or sizes are, but I do find that that is not an issue because I make or use manual measurements from the fence to the blade. So for me, that is not an issue. Also, on the fence, I can move the fence backwards and forwards for certain use cases when using the bandsaw. So simple system, but quite effective. In your field of view, you'll see the blade guides. These are ceramics, and that is the next area we're going to be looking at. Not much to say about the ceramic guides other than the fact that they are not bearings. I prefer, or much prefer, the ceramic guides over bearing guides. Not that ceramics hold any advantage in regards to, let's say, accuracy of the cut or in the cut over bearing guides, but I do find that setting up my bandsaw to give me that quality of cut is simpler and a little bit more foolproof. They do allow your blade to run cooler, especially if you set them up so that they run against the blade. Mine is set slightly, very slightly away from the edge of the blade, and I don't find that I have any issues with drift or anything else as a result, but they are then there to keep the blade in place. You've got the mounting blocks, one on either side. Each one of the mounting blocks will have two ceramic blocks. There's one at the bottom, then one top, and then the same on the other side. You've got 4 connection points. In the back, that ring you see there is the bearing that the blade will push up against as you push into the cuts, and it's a little bit of a misnomer. It's also ceramic, and that will then start spinning around as the blade runs, or the back of the blade runs against it. Getting to the ceramic blocks may be an issue for some. I have to open up this cover here, and to be able to open up that cover to get to the guides, I also have to open up the main covers, which is a bit of a pain, but not a deal breaker. Here you may see the tip of a handle sticking out, and there's 3-4 few handles in the back. I'll show you a photo of what it looks like, to be able to make all the adjustments in this assembly here. What I have found is, after I've done setups and the tip of the handle sticks out from the bottom of the assembly, as I push a workpiece through, it does tend to snag on this, especially if I have this very close to the upper surface of my workpiece. So I've gotten used to making sure that they are out of the way before I start using my bandsaw. But my preference most definitely is the ceramic guide over a bearing guide. I'm going to readjust the camera angle quickly, and I'm then going to show you my all-time favorite feature of this bandsaw, and as I mentioned earlier, it may come as a surprise. And my favorite part of the N4400 is its tire, and the fact that the tire is flat front to back. All the other bandsaws that I've come across in the wild have a crown, meaning that the middle of the tire is raised, and that gets important in the position of the teeth of the blade in relation to the apex of the crown. In the case of the Hammer, the manual states that any blade that you use between 16 millimeters and 6 millimeters wide need to run in the middle of the tire. Any blade wider than that is the teeth need to hang over the front edge or off the front edge of the tire. Why this is something I really do appreciate is because I'm lazy. Whenever I swap out blades that are anywhere between 6 and 16 millimeters wide, rather than run the blade in the middle of the tire and then adjust the guide blocks in correct position behind the teeth, usually about a millimeter or two behind the gullet, I load the blade or install the blade and then adjust the tracking to suit the current position of my guides without having to adjust the guides. So I'll either bring the blade forward or back depending on the position of the guides, and I don't need to adjust or fiddle with the guides. The only guides that I do need to adjust then would be the guides at the back of the blade, then depending on the width of the blade. It does have a slight disadvantage that dust and chips get trapped easier between the blade and the tire. But when I do my maintenance or service once a year on my bandsaw, I simply clean off the tire with something like white spirits or turpentine, and it's ready to go for another 12 months. So thanks to me being relatively lazy, I think this is the hidden gem as far as features go on this particular bandsaw. And that brings to conclusion all the things I love about it. Before I tell you more about the features that I don't particularly like on the machine, and there aren't a lot, it would be remiss of me if we didn't go through some of the safety features on this machine. And we'll start with the top compartment. In there's a switch, and if the door is not closed, the machine will not start up. There isn't a switch in the bottom compartment, and as a result of that, the top and bottom door are attached to one another with that bar, and they open and close together. It's also the reason for my least favorite feature on the machine, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. While we're here, the stop button there is effective, it's raised, it's sensitive, and I find that light pressure there will stop your machine. My machine does not have, excuse me, I'm stepping on my dog. This machine does not have a brake or a foot brake that will stop your machine, and as far as I know, Felder offers that as an upgrade, or I think in some regions it ships like that standard. My machine does not have that feature. I am showing you a short video where I've started the machine and then I stop it, and I think they've implemented some kind of electric brake or electronic brake on the motor. So even though I don't have the foot brake, I find that the machine does stop quite quickly as a result of that feature. those are the safety features. Let's move on to some of the aspects of this machine that I don't like all that much. First one is this wheel here. Now, nothing wrong with the wheel itself, but you use this to tension or place tension on the blade. Most machines or other machines that I've come across has a system in the back of the machine to release the tension when you are not using the bandsaw. This machine does not have that, so you need to use the wheel to either tension or detension the blade when you are not using it. The manual even has a little picture where you put a label in this area here to remind you to tension the blade before you switch on the machine. Touch wood, in 3 years I've never started up my machine without tensioning the blade, so not a major issue. This window here is through there you'll see a gauge that will tell you how much tension you do have on the blade, and I find that to be relatively inaccurate. And that's the case with even machines from other manufacturers. These are notoriously inaccurate. I do use it to check if I actually do have tension on the blade before I start my machine, but I sort of trust my manual check on the tension just by pushing my index finger on the side of the blade, and I check the tension on the blade that way. Coming down to the table, you'll see that there's a very handy mitre slot here for all kinds of jigs and so forth, and Felder offers all kinds of ancillaries on this machine. However, the slot is non-standard, so if you are going to be making your own DIY sleds and jigs and so forth, you do need to cut the sliders that go into the mitre slot at non-standard sizes. It's a bit of a pain, but nothing major really. Moving on to my least favorite feature of the machine, and that is that corner, that exact particular corner. And I mentioned earlier that the doors open and close at the same time, and I'm sure you can imagine where this is heading. If I have the doors open and I'm working at the bottom of the machine, I have at times forgotten that the other door is open and I've hit my head on this corner. Now, if I had more of a mop of hair, it probably wouldn't be as much of an issue, but that corner has drawn blood, and I do need to remind myself that it is there, and I've hit my head there more often than I care to admit, and that is by far my least favorite feature on the machine. As a final section, I'd like to show you a quick modification I did on my machine to resolve an issue that I encountered when I first got it that was quite dramatic. And I'll bring you in closer, I'll show you the modification that I did, and I'll explain to you why I did that. And that will bring the review of my Hammer N4400 to an end. And finally, I'd like to tell you more about probably the biggest problem or the most serious problem I've had with my bandsaw since I got it. I had it a couple of weeks and I was working, processing some raw lumber, and suddenly heard a horrible noise coming from the bottom compartment. What I found was that the guides had canted in towards the blade and they were running against the blade. They'd come loose, and that actually damaged one of the guides. The other one is still fine, but it did damage one of the guides. Investigation seemed to indicate that these thumb screws worked themselves loose as a result of the vibrations on the machine. I tightened everything up, realigned everything, and after a few hours of use the same happened, but luckily this time around it wasn't as serious as the first time. What I did to solve the problem is I added behind the thumb nut, I added a spring washer to put tension on the system. And that seems to have resolved the problem, and I haven't had in 3 years, I haven't had that happen to me again. So no harm done, just some damage to one of the guides. So that is a modification that if you have the saw that you could consider, and if you do decide to get the bandsaw, I would implement this as a matter of haste if you have the ceramic guides. And while I'm sitting on my knees filming the last section, I'd like to thank everyone who has taken the time to subscribe to my channel and like any one of my videos. And I would like you guys to ask me questions in the comment section. If there's anything about this bandsaw that I've skipped, Anything else you'd like to know, ask me in the comment section. I read every single one of them. But don't leave yet. I have a few final notes to finish off today's video. I'm going to set up the camera again and I'll see you for those. And that is the Hammer N4400, a machine that I believe deserves a lot more attention out there. What's in the name, you may ask? Well, 4400 stands for the size of the wheels on this machine, and that's 440 millimeters, which brings it actually closer to 17 inches, not exactly 18 inches, but close enough. Something I didn't mention about the machine is its build quality. It's built like a tank. It weighs 170 kilograms, and honestly, I don't know what I would have done without it in my workshop. That brings us to the end of this review. Remember, in the comment section, if you'd like to know anything else about the machine or like to add anything else, especially if you happen to own one of these. That brings us to the end of today's video. I hope you have a good one. Be safe in your own workshop, and until I see you in my next video, have a good one. Cheers.